The story starts with Michael and his wife, Sarah, driving back home after spending a few days out of town. It was late at night, and the road they were traveling on was almost completely deserted. There were no houses nearby, no streetlights, and hardly any traffic. On one side of the road was a dense forest that stretched deep into the darkness. Michael was driving quietly when Sarah suddenly looked toward the trees. "Wait!" Michael glanced at her. "What is it?" "I think I heard something." Michael slowed the car and listened. For a few seconds, they heard nothing. Then, from somewhere inside the forest, came a faint sound. It sounded like someone shouting. Sarah looked at Michael. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah." They continued listening. A few seconds later, the sound came again. This time it was clearer. It sounded like children crying. Sarah immediately became concerned. "Michael, those sound like kids." Michael looked toward the forest. There was something unusual about hearing children in a place this isolated, especially this late at night. Sarah turned to him. "We should find out what's happening. What if someone is in trouble?" Michael hesitated for a moment before pulling the car over. He turned off the engine and looked toward the dark trees. "Stay here. I'll go take a look." Sarah nodded, although she clearly wasn't comfortable with the idea. "Just be careful." Michael stepped out of the car. He had been a police officer for years before becoming a security guard, so he was trained to handle dangerous situations. Before walking toward the forest, he made sure he had his pistol with him. Then he disappeared between the trees. At first, the sounds were faint. Michael had to walk several yards into the forest before he could hear them clearly. Children crying, people running, and voices shouting somewhere ahead. He continued following the sounds. The deeper he went, the more uneasy he became. Then, suddenly, he stopped. Through the trees ahead, he could see several people moving. Michael crouched down and watched carefully. There were 3 men. All 3 were wearing masks, and they had 6 children with them. The men were forcing the children through the forest, dragging them along as the children cried and struggled. Michael immediately realized what he was looking at. These children weren't lost. They were being taken. And whoever these 3 men were, they had no intention of letting the children go. Michael stayed behind the trees and watched for a few seconds. He knew he had to act, but he was alone. 3 men were standing between him and the children, and he had no idea what they might do if they realized someone was watching them. Michael tightened his grip on his weapon. He took a breath. Then he stepped out from behind the trees. Michael stepped out from behind the trees. The 3 masked men immediately noticed him. For a moment, everyone froze. The children looked toward Michael, while the 3 men turned in his direction. Michael raised his pistol. "Stop right there." Instead of obeying, the men began moving nervously. Michael knew he couldn't let them take another step with the children. He fired a warning shot into the air. The loud gunshot echoed through the forest. The 3 men immediately panicked. They turned toward Michael, clearly caught off guard by the sudden confrontation. Michael moved toward them. "Let the kids go." But the men refused. One of them suddenly rushed toward Michael. Michael reacted quickly. Years of police training took over, and he managed to defend himself as the other 2 men moved in. A struggle broke out. Michael fought to keep the men away from the children while trying to prevent any of them from escaping deeper into the forest. The confrontation became chaotic. The children were terrified and kept their distance as Michael continued fighting the 3 men. Despite being outnumbered, his training gave him an advantage. One man went down, then another. The 3rd tried to escape, but Michael stopped him. During the struggle, Michael was forced to fire and hit one of the men in the leg, bringing him down. Within moments, all 3 suspects were on the ground and unable to continue. Michael immediately stopped fighting and turned toward the children. "You're okay. You're safe now." The children were frightened, but they were no longer being dragged through the forest. Michael quickly pulled out his phone and called Sarah. "Sarah, call the police right now." Her voice came through the phone. "What happened?" "I found them. There are 6 children here, and 3 men were trying to take them through the forest." Sarah immediately understood how serious the situation was. She contacted the police and gave them their exact location. Michael stayed with the children while they waited. He kept watching the 3 suspects to make sure none of them tried to get back up or escape. A short time later, police officers arrived at the scene. They immediately secured the area and took all 3 suspects into custody. The officers then began speaking with the children and gathering information about what had happened. For Michael, the most important thing was that all 6 children were alive and safe. But the investigation was only beginning. The police now needed to find out who these men were, where they had come from, and most importantly, where the children had been taken from in the first place. And as the officers began questioning the suspects, Michael realized just how close those 6 children had come to disappearing without a trace. The police officers quickly secured the area and took the 3 suspects into custody. Michael stayed nearby with Sarah while the officers began speaking with the 6 children. The children were frightened and confused, but they were finally safe. The police wanted to know who the children were and where they had been taken from. At first, the children struggled to explain everything, but slowly, the officers began putting the pieces together. They also questioned the 3 suspects and asked for their names, addresses, and phone numbers. The investigation quickly became more serious. What had initially looked like a single kidnapping attempt now appeared to involve a much larger situation. The officers carefully documented everything they had found in the forest and continued gathering information from the suspects. Meanwhile, Michael stayed with his wife and watched as the children were brought to safety. He kept thinking about that would have happened if they had simply continued driving. The road had been empty, the forest had been dark, and the children's voices could easily have been ignored. But Sarah had heard something. Michael had listened, and instead of driving away, they had stopped. Eventually, the police were able to identify the children's families and begin the process of getting them safely back home. For the parents, the news was overwhelming. They had been desperately waiting for their children, and now, after what seemed like an endless nightmare, they were finally going to see them again. Michael and Sarah watched from a distance as the children were reunited with their families. There were no celebrations, no dramatic speeches, just relieved parents holding their children again. For Michael, that was enough. He hadn't planned to become involved in anything that night. He had simply heard something that didn't sound right, and he decided not to ignore it. But there was still one question that stayed with him. What if they hadn't stopped that night? What if Sarah had never heard those voices? What if Michael had decided it was just his imagination? And what if the children had disappeared deeper into the forest before anyone realized what was happening? That thought made Michael realize how important those few minutes had been. But the story wasn't really about being in the right place at the right time. It was about paying attention when something feels wrong. Because sometimes, a simple decision to stop and investigate can make a difference in someone's life. And for 6 children that night, it made all the difference. By the time the police finished their work, the 6 children were safely out of danger. Their families were contacted, and one by one, the children were reunited with their parents. For those families, the moment was more than they could have hoped for. Michael and Sarah watched quietly. They kept thinking about how easily they could have driven past that forest and never known what was happening inside. Michael hadn't planned to become involved in anything that night. He had simply heard something unusual. Sarah had heard it too, and instead of ignoring it, they stopped. That decision gave the police enough time to reach the location and bring the 3 suspects into custody. For Michael, the experience was a reminder of something he had learned during his years as a police officer. Sometimes, paying attention can be just as important as knowing what to do. The road was quiet, the forest was dark, and those children's cries could easily have gone unheard. But Michael and Sarah listened, And because they did, 6 children made it home safely that night. Sometimes you don't have to know exactly what's happening to realize that something isn't right. You just have to be willing to stop and find out.